Some years ago, when I had just completed my doctorate, I was teaching my first postdoctoral class. It was a class in the life and teachings of Jesus. And so I was preparing for that. I went to my doctoral mentor and I said to him, if you were charged with teaching this course, what would it be that you would want to make sure that your students understood? I expected him to think of this and give various ideas, but without hesitation, not a moment's hesitation, he looked straight at me and said, Kingdom of God. Kingdom of God, yes, yes. If you want to understand the New Testament, especially the Gospels, you have to think about the Kingdom of God. So in this session, we'll look at the Kingdom of God, but we need to begin with this little point of confusion for some people. Kingdom of God versus Kingdom of Heaven. So we'll look at that just very briefly. And then we'll talk about the Kingdom of God with respect to eschatology. And finally, we'll close out with some reflections about the Kingdom of God. Kingdom of God, Kingdom of Heaven. What's the difference? Well, for some people, they try to make a big deal about what is the Kingdom of God and what is the emphasis when it says Kingdom of God? What is the emphasis when it says Kingdom of Heaven? I want to show you a few graphics to really understand what's going on. The first one is just the Kingdom of God in the whole New Testament. One of the interesting things is that although Jesus talked a lot about the Kingdom of God, his followers didn't use that word so much, didn't use that term. As you see here in this graphic, it occurs just a very few times in the rest of the New Testament, even though it's very heavily in the Gospels. The second graphic here just focuses in on the Gospel, on the Gospels, the Kingdom of God as it is in the Gospels. You can see, interestingly, it's not so much in the Gospel of John, but very heavily in Mark and Luke. And then a very similar graphic, but this time adding in Kingdom of Heaven. What do you notice? Kingdom of Heaven is exclusively in the book of Matthew. There's a few times in Matthew where we find Kingdom of God, but Kingdom of God is mostly in Mark and Luke. Kingdom of Heaven is in Matthew. One of the very, very interesting things is in the places, the parallels, the gospel parallels, the places where Mark and Luke have Kingdom of God, Matthew has put instead Kingdom of Heaven. Why? Well, there's a very simple and good explanation. Remember that Matthew is the most Jewish of all of the Gospels. Remember also that the Jews did not like to say the name God. Remember the 10 Commandments. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. And so what did they do? So as to avoid even saying the name in vain, they decided not to say the name at all. And then they pushed it a little bit even farther than that and said, let's not even say the word God. Let's say instead heaven. So when we mean God, we won't say God, we'll say heaven. So now we have a very perfect explanation. Why did Matthew say heaven? Kingdom of Heaven? Because his upbringing, shall we say, his religious training just brought him to the place where it was hard for him to say the word God because of his Jewish upbringing, his Jewish sensibilities. Of course, there are a couple of places where we still find the term Kingdom of God in Matthew. So one of the jobs of a careful student of Matthew is to say, why did Matthew retain Kingdom of God in these places? But the general answer is very simple. Kingdom of God equals Kingdom of Heaven. It's the same thing. Two ways of saying the same thing. One, a Jewish way of saying it. One, a more Gentile way of saying the exact same thing. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about kingdom eschatology. What is the kingdom of God? Well, Jesus talked about the kingdom of God as being near, the kingdom of God as approaching. We can say in simplest terms, the kingdom of God is the realm where God is reigning, where God is ruling as king. Thus, the word kingdom. And Jesus talks about it as being near, as coming. So, if we consider a time orientation for the kingdom, not only a space orientation, we can ask the question, what is the kingdom? The kingdom is, in a sense, the end times. The kingdom is the pronouncement of the end times, the technical term, the eschaton. So then we ask, what was Jesus telling us when he talked about the kingdom? Was he telling us that the kingdom is already here in his ministry? The technical term for that is realized eschatology. That Jesus is saying, it's here. I have brought it. It's right here, right now. Another perspective is, it's called imminent theology, meaning not here, but just across the horizon. If we're going toward the horizon, you can't quite see it, but in any second now we'll see the tops of the trees on the other side of the horizon. It's like that. It's just almost here. Is that what Jesus meant? You can see how those two are in tension. It's here in realized eschatology. And some scholars have studied Jesus' proclamations very carefully, and they said they've been convinced realized eschatology is what Jesus is saying. He's saying that it's here. In my ministry, you are experiencing the kingdom of God. That's why he was able to perform miracles, for example, because the kingdom of God is here. But others have said, the way that Jesus talks about it, it's almost here. It's approaching. It's very nearly here, but not quite. Holding those two in tension is really where we need to be. And there's a phrase that is used for this called inaugurated eschatology. It's borrowing from political science. What's inauguration? Inauguration is the first day of someone's reign, the first day. So it holds all of the promise of the new politician who's taken power, all of the promise and expectation and excitement for the future, but it's not yet unfolded. There's still more to go and to continue and to do. Inaugurated eschatology somehow holds realized and imminent eschatology together. One of the scholars who talked about this used a very, very nice phrase. His phrase, instead of inaugurated kingdom, his phrase was proleptic kingdom. You say, well, that doesn't help me very much. What's proleptic? Well, proleptic comes from a grammatical term. A grammatical term, the prolepsis. The grammatical term, it's a pronoun that comes before the antecedent. Oh, I hope I'm not getting too deep for you. A pronoun coming before the antecedent, meaning antecedent is the word that the pronoun refers to. And antecedent means coming before. So the antecedent, the noun, is supposed to come first and then the pronoun, so we know who the pronoun is referring to. But once in a while, we flip it around and we put the pronoun first, expecting the referent, the antecedent, to come out of time, so to speak. An example of that might be something like this. Although he knew better, so there's our pronoun he, although he knew better, the child still ate too much. So, we don't know until the sentence is almost finished who the he is. And then we find the child. So it's coming out of time. And that's the extended meaning of prolepsis. It's coming before its natural time. Or we can say out of time. And so a scholar by the name of Pannenberg took this idea and applied it to the kingdom of God. So we can envision time like a line, and we can divide up the time between, as we often do, before Christ and after Christ. We can call that BC, AD, and talking about the birth of Christ. Notice on this line that I have extended it a little bit beyond the end of AD. Why? Because that is the eschatological event. That's the event where God breaks into history and says, enough. History is done, and now we're going to inaugurate, we're going to begin, we're going to live in the kingdom. So the kingdom belongs on the far side of this eschatological event. But what is the eschatological event? The event that tells us that the eschaton, the end times, are here, or the kingdom is here. What is that? That's the death and resurrection of Jesus. But wait a minute. The death and resurrection of Jesus, that's the event that tells us that the eschaton is here? Yes. But it's in our past. Right. So you see, the event that belongs in our future, the event that triggers the eschaton, is already in our past. It came out of time. And so the cross, in a sense, is the guarantee of the eschaton. So Jesus came out of time. His resurrection is the definitive eschatological event. But now we can see that the future is in our past. However, there is more to come. There's a consummation to come. That's why we live in what we call the already and not yet. The kingdom is already here. The kingdom is not yet here. We have to hold those two things in careful tension because both are true in the proclamation of Jesus. And it's really helpful because it explains our spiritual journey. Have you ever experienced when at the very moment you do something so good, but something so bad? Same moment. Already the kingdom is here. Not yet. The kingdom's not yet here. I remember, I use this example a lot because it's so meaningful to me. I was in a church service, a very, very limited congregation that service. There were only maybe 5, 10, at the most 20 people in this congregation. Not in the congregation, but in the service itself. It happened to be an evening church service, and I was sitting there. I came in just a tiny bit late, and because there were so many open seats, of course I didn't sit in the front. I sat about maybe 3/4, 2/3 of the way back, and was enjoying the service, and a man came walking in. A man I'd never seen before. Although I'd been attending that church for some time, I'd never seen him before. He came walking in, and there's hundreds of seats available, but he sat right in front of me. Just right in front of me he sat. Well, I thought it was a little bit odd, but anyway, there he was. And the service continued, and we had a nice service, and the pastor gave an invitation at the end of the service to come forward and pray. And that man, the one right in front of me, he got up and he went and he prayed. And although this doesn't happen to me very often, I heard God say, not out loud, but I really heard him say, "Go and pray with that man." And I got up and I started walking down to pray with him. And in the moment, that was such a beautiful moment. It was a kingdom moment. I was hearing God speaking to me. God speaking. How is this? God is speaking to me. And as I was walking down, obedient to God's voice, I heard my, my own voice saying, "What a great person you are." Can you imagine? What a great person you are. Pride. Pride is welling up in front of me. In the moment of my greatest obedience, my prideful, sinful self is right there. One moment entwined like that. My friends, that's the already and not yet. The good news is there's more to come. There's a consummation to come when that not yet part will be fulfilled. So the kingdom, yes, the proleptic, already and not yet kingdom. As we reflect on the kingdom of God, I want to encourage you, as we've been talking about the already and not yet kingdom, I want to encourage you to avoid two extremes. We can call them the over-realized kingdom and the under-realized kingdom. These two extremes account for a lot of the trouble that we see in theological trouble, shall I say, in the church these days. Over-realized kingdom. The kingdom's already here. This is what we get. This is the kingdom. One of the big problems in the church these days is prosperity theology or prosperity gospel. The problem with prosperity gospel, among others perhaps, is that it falls off of this fine middle road of already and not yet kingdom on the side of over-realized eschatology. As if the kingdom is fully here. It's here, yes, but it's not yet here as well. The other extreme is the under-realized eschatology. The problem with under-realized eschatology is everything is future. Nothing is here. Two consequences of that is that we can become escapist. There's nothing we can do. We just let life pass us by. We don't work to bring the kingdom. That's a problem. And secondly, can leave us discouraged and hopeless. There's nothing we can do here and now. We can be afraid it's only going to get worse, and we can find ourselves in a cycle of defeat in our Christian walk. Finally, think about the Lord's Prayer. Remember, in the Lord's Prayer, Jesus invites us to pray, "Thy kingdom come." We're asking God to bring His kingdom. That's a really good prayer. God, bring your kingdom. Since it's here and not yet here, it's a good prayer. God, bring your kingdom. Make it more and more here. But the flip side, we can't pray that prayer unless we're willing to work as God's agent in the world to bring His kingdom.